In my last video, I sang the praises of the Sega Saturn ports of Neo Geo titles. As I mentioned towards the end of that video, there were a couple of games that weren't ported well to the Saturn, Fatal Fury 3 and Waku Waku 7. For this video, we will take a look at their flaws, but I will mention any redeeming qualities as well. First, we will cover Fatal Fury 3, released for the Neo Geo in 1995 and for the Saturn on June 28, 1996. This was the third Neo Geo game ported to the system after Galaxy Fight and the King of Fighters 95. The most notable change made for this entry was the introduction of the sway system, which replaced the plane switching system used in prior Fatal Fury games. You can sway in and out of both the foreground and background, but for only a limited amount of time. This tactic is useful when you want to dodge your opponent's attack and then counter. Five new playable characters are introduced, including Han Fu, a nunchaku-wielding Hong Kong detective based on Jackie Chan, Italian-American kickboxer Franco Bash, and private detective Blue Mary. There are three new boss opponents, including sadistic criminal Ryuji Yamazaki. New moves were added for returning fighters, such as Terry's Power Dunk. Fatal Fury 3 boasts impressive graphics with highly detailed and colorful venues, multiple layers of parallax scrolling in some stages, plus they are much wider than any of the previous Fatal Fury titles, being 3 screens in width. Luckily, that is not lost here. The Saturn port runs on 320 by 224 versus the 304 by 224 resolution on the Neo Geo, thus you see more of the stage on each side of the screen. The tracks are taken from the Neo Geo CD version, as this port is based on that. I didn't have any issues when it came to performing special moves. You can save your progress in this port. There are 3 issues that negatively impact this port: the abundance of loading screens, choppy movement of the action, and the constant slowdown. There are long load times between the end of the match and the victory quote, and also between the opening dialogue for the next match and the start of the next contest. Luckily, there's no loading between rounds. This allows the tracks to continue to play. There are missing character animation frames. Here is an example of Terry performing his burn knuckle between the Neo Geo and Saturn versions. I tracked it from when his motion began until the trail of flame behind him disappeared. Slowdown often occurs when fighters take damage when swaying or from some special attacks. The 1 MB RAM card would have alleviated this and other issues, but it would not be available until the real Bout Fatal Fury port, which was released on September 20th, 1996. The performance of this game is not affected by the card, as I recorded gameplay with it. Finally, the sound effects and voice samples sound faded, which was a common issue with 32-bit console ports of Neo Geo fighters. This port is very bare bones in terms of extra features, so you're better off downloading this for one of the modern consoles. So let's look at side-by-side footage of the Neo Geo and Saturn versions of Fatal Fury 3. Second is Waku Waku 7. Released for the Neo Geo in 1996 and for the Saturn on June 20th, 1997, it utilizes the 1MB RAM card. The 7 in Waku Waku 7 comes from the Waku Waku balls. It is said that whoever possesses them all will have their wish granted. Each of the 7 fighters possesses one and they all have their own desires to be fulfilled. These fighters are parodies of various works of video games, manga, and pop culture. Examples include Dandy J, who was based on Indiana Jones. There's Bonus Kun, a literal punching bag who was based on Ryu. While the roster is small, there's plenty of attacks and maneuvers handy to provide lots of enjoyment, such as pursuit and recovery attacks, EX specials, Doki Doki moves which are supers, and the Hara Hara attack, which is a high damage, unblockable attack that requires charging before it can be executed. The Saturn port has a versus mode where you can play against a CPU opponent of your choice using any character, including the non-playable fighters Bonus Kun and Fernandez. There's lots of nice artwork that is shown depending on the time of year and during some load screens. There's an option to play the game in wide background mode where the stage is completely scaled out, giving you lots of space to maneuver around. Despite not having a Neo Geo CD release, an arranged soundtrack was composed for this port, which is great. Unfortunately, this version had a plethora of issues which greatly affected the quality of play. The first issue I want to bring up is the number of load screens. There's loading between the stage number screen, the opening quote, the start of the match, in between rounds, which causes the tracks to restart, and the winning quote. Another issue are the pixelated graphics. This distorts many of the background details, hampering the appearance of what is a great looking game. Like in the Fatal Fury 3 port, there are missing frames of animation. Here is an example of Polytank Z getting up between the Neo Geo and Saturn versions. I ignored the sirens as it would be a pain to track. The biggest flaw with this port is the slowdown. This is very evident with matchups between two large fighters or when characters execute Doki Doki and Hara Hara moves. One of the best examples of the former are versus matchups where both players use Fernandez. Slowdown also occurs in stages where there are background character sprites, such as Arina, or if you fight as or against Dandy J, who always has supporting characters alongside him. Finally, you cannot save your progress in this port. On the plus side, the controls are responsive and EX specials, Doki Doki and Hara Hara attacks are simple to execute because the multi-button input portions required for these commands are mapped to a single button. I played this version a lot before I purchased the MVS cart and had revisited it on occasion afterwards. The arcade version can be downloaded for the PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch for $8, thus it's a tough sell to recommend the Saturn port. We will close out this video with side-by-side footage of the Neo Geo and Saturn versions of Waku Waku 7. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Touch!